thanks for watching this. I'm in the garden of Buenos Aires Library, which is a bit of a show-offy thing to say, but I partly say it because Buenos Aires is one of the world's leading places for psychoanalysis, particularly for Lacanian psychoanalysis. It's probably the #1 city in the world, maybe Paris. Might have something to say about that, but it's certainly one of the great psychoanalytic centres, and it's very normal for people here to be in analysis and to talk to each other about their analysis. And I think because it's so common, it's not seen as something for sick people. It's seen as something for everybody, and therefore it's not seen as curative. It's genuinely seen as analytical rather than something which has to make you feel better, which is definitely not something that psychoanalysis should be too worried about. So while I'm here for a few months, and I'm going to make some short films about psychoanalysis, because I'm doing quite a lot of reading here, and really these videos are just ways for me to try and kind of explore my thoughts, really. They're definitely not intended to be in any way kind of teachy or didactic. They're kind of, well, they are a bit, I suppose, but they're mainly for me to just think through some ideas. So this first one is really, it's a kind of bit of an introduction to what psychoanalysis is, and the starting point of it is a bit unexpectedly, I guess. Terry Eagleton, the British Marxist philosopher, he has a chapter in one of his books, one of his literary theory books, on psychoanalysis, and he starts with an unusual quote from Freud, which is that the motive of human society is in the last resort an economic one. This begins Eagleton's chapter, and it's a part of Freud's thought that I guess is not usually focused on, but it's a kind of a fact that human beings need to work, and because they need to work and organise and become social, they need to repress. We all need to repress, or at least delay, our search for gratification. We need to repress the desires that really deep down we want fulfilled right here, right now. And we do this from a very early age. And so this first little video is going to give Freud's take on this, and then I'm going to do a second video on where Lacan took Freud's thinking. So we need to, in order to organise and be productive members of society, we need to repress some of our desires, and those desires get relegated to the unconscious. But it's probably worth asking why we have to do this. Why do humans have to do this, where most animals don't? At least they don't seem to. There doesn't seem to be a great deal of repression of desire in most animals. And Freud's answer to this is that human beings are unusual in that we're born very prematurely. The gestation period, I don't know if the gestation period for humans is particularly short, but when we emerge into the world, we are unusually dependent on our parents. And that dependence starts simply as a biological dependence. We need to be fed, we need to be sheltered, and it doesn't really matter from a biological point of view who does that. But as we feed, as we suck at the nipple, as our bodies come in contact with other bodies, that biological dependence becomes something else. It becomes pleasurable. There's a sensual quality to it. And this is what Freud sees as the beginning of sexuality. And it's why Freud sees sexuality as inherently perverted, because it's swerved away from something. It's the original important thing is just self-preservation, but that gets swerved away into something else, something erotic and sensual. So the child first of all discovers that his or her lips are sources of pleasure. They're what Freud calls erotogenic zones, and gradually the child discovers other erotogenic zones, the mouth and then the anus, the sense of active and passive, of control comes in at that anal stage, if we can call it a stage. Sorry if this is really noisy, by the way. It's quite a busy area. So the mouth, the anus, and then the genitals. These areas of the body gradually become kind of charged with pleasure. And these drives which cause these charges are completely uncoordinated at first. They're not coordinated around anything. But gradually they do become organised. And they become organised around the body, around the child's body. And this body becomes increasingly structured, increasingly unified. The child can recognise the body as its own, and recognises its body as itself an object of desire. So yeah, we start off with these drives which are very unstructured. They're not gendered. The child has got no sense of gender at this stage. They're not socially organised. They're chaotic. They're anarchic, and they become structured. The process of structuring those desires and socialising them in a way is, of course, the Oedipus complex. So we've seen so far that the child's growing sensuality, which is unorganised, unlabelled, ungendered, but very, very real. Its primary object, its first object, is fairly obviously the mother. And Freud says that it's the mother, whether the child is a boy or a girl. He says this is a very... Freud's writings on female sexuality are problematic, famously problematic. And he says that the girl switches her object of desire to the father, and then when the father becomes a sort of an unviable object of desire, the girl switches back to the mother. She identifies with the mother. She desires, she wants to have her father's baby. It is not really clear from Freud why the girl would want to do that, because unlike the boy, in Freud's theory, the boy has a fear of castration, and this is why he identifies with the father. The girl can't fear castration. In a sense, she is already castrated. So there's all sorts of problems with the Oedipus complex, and female sexuality is one of the biggest problems. But really, what the theory of the Oedipus complex is at its heart is the move from a two-person relationship, the child and the mother, towards a three-person relationship. So the child is persuaded over time to abandon his desire for the mother, as I say, by the threat which is perceived by the child. It's not necessarily explicitly verbalised by the parents, it very rarely would be. But the child perceives this threat of castration. And castration, there is a literal genital meaning to castration, but I don't think it just means that. I think the fear of castration, certainly for Lacan, is about a fear of no longer being the only one. In a two-person relationship, you are the only one for the mother. And it's through the Oedipus complex that you have to accept you're not the only one, not for your mother, not for anybody. So the child, if the Oedipus complex goes well, the boy kind of makes peace with his father, who at first he's seen as a rival for the mother's love. He identifies with the father, and he sees in the father a kind of a symbolic place which one day he might fill. So castration has kind of socialised the boy, and I add in brackets here, what about the girl? I'm not really clear how Freud's theory kind of socialises the girl, but it's fairly clear how it socialises the boy. And it goes back to where we started, that the boy has deferred pleasure, he's deferred gratification of his desire, in exchange for becoming a member of society. and of course this desire he has for the mother must get repressed, must get pushed, it must be no longer conscious. And this, Freud says, is how the unconscious is created. It's created in the process of repressing the incestuous desire for the mother. So the Oedipus complex, if it goes well, it turns us from incestuous desire, and it turns us from purely family structure towards society. It takes us from kind of nature to what we might call culture, and it takes us from anarchy and chaos to an acceptance and an introjection of authority. I'm going to do a separate video about the Oedipus complex, and I'm not sure I've particularly done it justice there. There's a lot of, I think, important and rarely said things to say about the Oedipus complex, because when you explain it, as I've just done, certainly to the non-psychoanalytically inclined, it does kind of sound a bit questionable. I do think it makes some sense, but I think it needs to have some context, so we'll do that in another film. In fact, I'm going to stop there, just because I don't want these videos to be too long, and we're at about the 11-minute mark. So I'm going to stop there, and we'll carry on in a separate film to see where the Oedipus complex takes us.